We know we've been recorded for 2 centuries in the records of the United States here and Florida. But before that, the Native Americans record didn't really show us much, other than when we come to Francis the Prophet and Millie Francis as being symbolic of the sign. But they executed him at St. Mark's, and they sent her out to
thank you.
And they sent her out to Oklahoma, in which she ended up getting a pension from the U.S. government. And this is even like how I look at it, as we can almost deconstruct racism in America through what happened to our journey here in Florida, and through this community going on the Trail of Tears to Oklahoma and all of that. But for some reason, that history is being, I'll say, whitewashed or removed, just simply, with our current governor and thing, they don't even want to put the dots together to show that, hey, listen, we did come to peace. We did manage to stay in our, on our land and intermarry with whites and blacks. And, my cousin was just saying, yeah, we walking around with green eyes talking about we don't like white people. We're half white,
Thank you. If you don't mind, this would be a good place to break just to introduce the setup here. We're in Hyde Park, Florida, in Wakulla County.
Yes.
This is Marna Weston for the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. My co-researchers today are
Donovan Carter,
Gabrielle Hurd,
Avery Goodman, Vanessa Obando.
And we are learning here today from, please state your name, sir.
Thomas Mitchell.
And Mr. Mitchell, tell us your date of birth, please.
6/26/1959.
And where were you born?
I was born in Washington, D.C., in the Freedmen's Hospital in Washington, D.C.
Okay, and we're here on this land, which is part of a sacred heritage that you've been describing for us very fully. We're going to back up on some of that. Could you please tell us why you're here with us today?
Okay, well, I'm here today to first introduce you to our community as it has evolved from and what we are today in the 2023, and how the Negro Fort, which was on the Apalachicola River, and its survivors founded this community, or they moved into what was a native village, fishing village community, and they became and intermarried, and they started this community some 200 years ago.
If you could stop there for a second for us. This Negro Fort is the one that history tells us that was destroyed by Andrew Jackson, the victor of the War of 1812, the general?
Yes.
Okay, so what is your relation to these group of people that survived the destruction of the fort and coming to this place?
Okay, well, my relationship comes through my mother's family, and they were the native inhabitants of this area on the west bank of the Wakulla River. And they were first introduced as farmers. That was their last name. Minnie Farmer was my mother, and her family apparently had been here living on the river all this while, and they were developing their homesteads here. And so I began to research my mother's family's background here, and it took me to Prospect Bluff. One of the important things was we wanted to know why this community was named Hyde Park Community. And that was one of the things that got me really interested in this. We have Bossie Hawkins.
Okay.
Great. He is also, I'm glad he arrived to help us. And,
well, we can take a quick break and allow Mr. Hawkins to come in. You introduce him to us.
Hey.
Hello, sir. How are you today?
Bossie.
Hi, I'm Marna Weston. Nice to meet you, Mr. Hawkins.
I'm Donovan Carter.
Gabrielle Hurd.
And Bossie is head of the Hyde Park Community Preservation Society.
Okay, wonderful.
And he is the man to talk to really about it. He's the generation. His generation is like around with my mother's generation, which I've always been intrigued to know why the community existed here and how this independent, free community of black people, really our heritage here in Florida. And so I've been consulting Bossie and many of the things of about how long we've been here, where we come, and the various families. There were a number of families here, and interesting enough, their family names come from, Hawkins, Matthews, Farmers, Triplets, Howards, and I found that those names are all generals of the United States Army, like Howard, of course, Howard University, and other Hawkins, Benjamin Hawkins, who was the Indian agent for this Florida, and all of this goes back to showing how long our family has been holding these sacred grounds as our homeland.
And your recollection of how much time that is?
Well, I would say for the last 200 years, and probably 150 years before that, we were here.
Okay, well, before we introduce Mr. Hawkins, would you please tell us, you were mentioning your mother, and there's some significance on the female side of your family. What was her name, and where was she from?
Right. Minnie Farmer was my mother, and she came from this community here, and pretty much the Farmer family at one time was living up on the Wakulla River here on this end. Her grandmother, who was also named Minnie Farmer, and her brothers and sisters and family, they have been here for generations.
Do you know your mom's date of birth?
Oh, November the 15th, and I think she was born around 43 or 44, maybe just after the after the World War II. I think.
Do you know where she was born?
But he might know. She was born here in this community, probably.
How about your dad?
The banks on the Wakulla River. My father's name is John Mitchell, and his family is from Norfolk, Virginia. Actually, he is buried in Smithfield, Virginia, and he came and met my mother some years back, and they got married and moved back to Virginia and then to Washington, D.C., where I was born. Excuse me. And we had always come back here. My mother always came back to visit my grandmother, and which that part of our family was so important to her that we'd come here on Christmas Eve, driving down here, and of course every time we came here we'd end up coming to this church because they would always have some kind of program going on or something. And my sister was the pianist here. Her name was Jean Triplett, and she ended up playing the piano here for the church for a long time, then moved to D.C., and she had a music ministry and things up there before she passed. She has since passed on.
Do you have any other brothers and sisters besides her?
Yes. There are 8 members of our family.
Could you go ahead and list those, please? And if you remember when they were born or something like that, mention as you talk about them.
Well, my siblings were started with Jean Henderson. She got married, Jean Triplett Henderson. My brother John Mitchell Jr., who actually was born in Sanford, Florida. And then my sister Anna Mitchell, and we had Lynn Mitchell. Then there was Kenneth Mitchell, Joseph Mitchell, Jan Mitchell, and myself. Okay. Thomas Mitchell.
Great. Now, let me ask you one more thing to if you could set for us. We talked about the Wakulla River. We talked about the Gulf. Could you place geographically your description? Where are we? Where are we standing right now?
Yeah. Well, I think we're standing in the heart of the village community that first probably started as a Native American fishing village. I think this is probably the essence of the roots. And those names, those farmers, those fishermen, eventually became those people named farmers here. And and this was, I'll say, more than 150 to 200 years ago.
Who were those indigenous people that were in this spot?
Well, they started out part of the Apalachicola Indians were the first here, but they eventually became part of that Seminole tribe that unified all of the tribes that were living along this way. And that was just prior to them going to England to visit and get permission with the Royal British Marines. I think it was Lord, wow, he's over the Royal British Marines. His name was Dorchester, Lord Dorchester. There are a lot of Dorchester counties here in the United States, and Dorchester commissioned William Augustus Bowles along with a delegation of native people from the United States. They had pirated and stole a Spanish ship, and they took it back to England. When they made that trip back to England, they went to the Court of Baths, and that's where Lord Dorchester was, over the Court of Baths. The Court of Baths then got the permission to build on Prospect Bluff, the British post. And that's how it started there. And many of our family members came from the Apalachicola River to this community. And I've seen, from looking at the history and reading what I've read on Prospect Bluff, the Negro Fort, I think that they settled after the destruction. Andrew Jackson destroyed it and maintained the fort. They had already been using this fort. Panton and Leslie had their warehouse factory on the Wakulla River, and they were trading specifically with the native people here. There were no other tradespeople that they were dealing with other than the native people that lived along this river, and they fished, they hunted, and they traded furs and skins and everything back with the Europeans back then at that time.
How much land was associated with this area, the Hyde Park? And sir, if you've joined us, please tell us who you are, please.
Yeah, my name is Bossie Hawkins, and I'm born and raised in this community.
Okay, and when and where were you born, sir?
I was born not even half a mile from here, right through those woods there in 1942.
And who were your mother and father?
My mother was Mary Farmer Hawkins. My father was Bossie Hawkins.
And where do you maintain residence now?
Tallahassee.
So would you say also that this is land that is tied to historically to your family, to the traditions that you support, and also you have a title in an association?
Yes. Matter of fact, this land we're standing on right now was donated by my grandfather.
What was his name?
Dave Hawkins. The boundaries, the survey was done sometime in the 1800s. We are standing in Lot 5 of Hartsfield River Survey. The boundary was right over the corner where the marker is right now. So that's where we stand.
And there was an association that you're the president of that was mentioned. Could you tell us what that is?
That's not exactly correct. I'm a member of Hyde Park Preservation Foundation. I'm not the president. President is Vincent Lamaric. It's kind of, we formed it. It's not as active as it could be or should be, but we maintain, we pay the fees every year to make sure it doesn't go dormant. So we're active and not so active. So we are still incorporated under the Florida statutes.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for the incorrect information. Thanks for clarifying. So what is the purpose of your organization?
Preserve Hyde Park. We're very proud of this community, and we formed it. Initially, we formed it specifically to try to get that building that we'll probably look at later behind us to restore it. We were not successful. We've gone several times and made applications to Florida, state of Florida, but we were not successful. So that was the initial, was initially incorporated in 2005 for that purpose.
Okay, we had a brief peek before you came up to the old schoolhouse. Is that what you're speaking of?
Yes, the old schoolhouse right behind us.
Okay, great. I want to take this opportunity, if you gentlemen would stand together, and give my colleagues an opportunity if they would like to ask some questions. Donovan, anybody?
Sure. Well, thank you both so much for being here today. I wanted to ask, I know we're planning on going to see more of where we're at today, but earlier you talked about how important it is for you to maintain the history of this land and recognition of this land as well. So you talked about restorative justice earlier. Could you talk a little bit more about how you guys would like Hyde Park in the future to be remembered or recalled or thought about?
Mr. Hawkins isn't on there.
I'm not sure how to verbalize it, but we would like to be able, say 100 years from now, if somebody's standing in this spot, they would know how the significance of this spot and what a rich tradition we have. Because we were proud for the greater part of since Reconstruction, This has been the African American community that was isolated in the sense that we were kind of set off from other communities around here, and we banded together. Excuse me. As a matter of fact, I returned just yesterday from a community reunion. It was held in Charlotte, North Carolina. There was about 200 of us there. We've done this every 2 years since 1967, Hyde Park Community Families Reunion, and we formed that to preserve the heritage of this community.
Well, I agree, and I'd like to say that I think that the importance of this community is the main thing. I have a mic there, so it's the main thing that I hope that we can continue to preserve and to keep in the forefront. Even as Bossie just stated, when we have our family reunions, they are all over the country, and I've found that they are indicative to the diaspora of where we've evolved through over the past 2 centuries and moved in and around the country, into Ohio, into North Carolina, into Detroit, and we have family members that have gone out into the world from this community that are leaders of the communities now and where they live, and they have had such a grounding, because I don't think many African American families can come back to their ancestral homelands in America today, in any of our major cities. This is why I think it's significant that we can literally show that, we have been placed here in this property, on this land, as long as there's been a United States of America, and prior to the United States of America finding itself. We were here in St. Mark's. This community was founded in 1524, if I'm not correct. And we have been on this west bank of the Wakulla River as long as they've been native habitants here. And we are those indigenous native people. We are also the original Seminole people that existed, that resisted slavery. We went up into Georgia and plantations into Alabama and burnt them and freed blacks to come back and live and then join this community and join other communities around here. In relationship to the Underground Railroad, there are communities named Buckhorn that is closer to the Negro Fort, that we have intermarried families through the generations now, triplets, Franklins, Harveys, farmers, they all live in that Buckhorn community, and they essentially started here, grounded here. And so I think pretty much that is where we hope that we can continue this and bring a lot of people to know that we have been free and independent people. We weren't enslaved, and we resisted enslavement, and probably the most successful resistance to slavery that we can probably put on record.
Do you feel any, any kinship with some of the other native peoples, the Miccosukee, Seminole you've mentioned, but the Yamasee, the Creek, the Gullah Geechee? Do you have any ties in those families as well?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know of any ties specifically, but we personally, I kind of feel a kindred to them, yes. Mm-hmm. But as for, again, no specific instances of any interaction, anything, but just kind of a kindred because we're kind of in the same situation, You're kind of outside of the mainstream, I guess would be a good way to put it. And so by virtue of being that, you sort of like the friend, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, that kind of mentality.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Okay, now we talked about seeing the waterway or something like that.
I was going to take them down to Wakulla Beach.
We're happy to do any kind of tour.
Well, now that Sherry has arrived, I'm glad that she is here with us. One of the things I did want to, if Bossie wanted to direct us on to, I didn't, we just looked at the school. We didn't go into the school or anything like that, but we did.
I don't know if it's safe.
Yeah, right. And that's the first thing we said. We don't think it's going to be safe to go into it. But our goal is absolutely with the Hyde Park Community Historic Preservation Society is to make sure that we can get our buildings that have been here for approximately 150 years, 160 years, maybe even more. And make sure that we can renovate and restore it back to its original essence so that it can show that we were freely educated in this community, and that many of the people here who went to Florida A&M and others were high achievers, and they did many things out over the generations, and it's not just something that we've newly found, but as we grow older and see our time coming, it's very difficult to get the proper recognition and funding in order to get these things restored and renovated. And on the other end also, I look forward to us doing some type of restorative justice project with this community so that we can show and clearly try to get our land boundaries, our original land boundaries, protected, protected, because like I said, I don't think there are many African American communities that can go back as far as we go back, and also, have our Florida heritage, which is even more important to us. Like I said, the city of St. Mark's in 1524 is probably older than St. Augustine. And that we think that it should show on the records that we've had a free black community here, or a free indigenous community, if they would like to say, of people who have been here prior to the Spanish even arriving. So we have a cemetery and all here that goes back and dates back a good, I know, 175 years.
We'd love to see that.
Not more.
We'd love to see that. You mentioned a history of resistance, so there are a zillion things I'm sure in everybody's mind to talk about. There's just two I'd like to focus back on for a second. You talked about Francis the Prophet, and a not well known, but obviously extremely important freedom fighter and director of resistance who was executed by General Jackson, later President Jackson. And also you talked about a female member of your family, Millicent, who is, you described to us, could you give that significance?
Okay, well, yeah, Millie Francis, who was actually the daughter of Francis the Prophet. She's symbolically the woman on the Florida flag. And she was removed from Prospect Bluff to Oklahoma, where she died, and she's buried at Beacons College. But she witnessed the execution of her father, and that turned her against, some military guy wanted to marry her, and she refused to marry her. And Francis the Prophet had at least 5 kids that accompanied him to Europe.
So the woman who was on the flag of the state of Florida, on the Great Seal of the state of Florida, University of Florida, all these things, was removed from Florida. Who removed her?
The Andrew Jackson and the Indian Removal Act. So she was one of the first to depart by boat to Louisiana and then up the Mississippi River. And she actually ended up on the Arkansas-Oklahoma border. And, due to how they designed it, she was in Oklahoma. And one of the first groups to arrive there after the execution of her father. Now, apparently on record, they say that her father, Francis the Prophet, along with, I want to say his name is Filatucci, who was known as the Black King. He was in Georgia, just north of what is Jackson County, Florida now. He owned all of that property up there, which is now Lake Seminole. Filatucci and those people never received money from Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson says he brought 22 million acres of land from the native people and gave them $1 million. I don't think Andrew Jackson ever had $1 million cash in his pocket until after he was president. But they never received anything. Instead, they were executed at the fort in St. Mark's. And what
was the nature and the cause of their execution? I'm sure history tells so, but in your words, who were these people, how and why were they executed? They
were executed by the U.S. government because Ambrewster and Ambernoth brought forth military weapons, gunpowder, and over 3,000 weapons were brought to Prospect Bluff by Ambrewster and Ambernoth. They ended up eventually going to Cat Island in the Bahamas, and they used their frigates and ships to make sure they transported many of the people away from here after the explosion at Prospect Bluff. They went to Tampa, they went to, inside the Gulf region of the western panhandle of Florida, and from there down into central Florida, and where that resistance continued for the next 30 years as the Seminole Wars. And so we have a lot of family connections there and in Texas. Like throughout the whole Seminole diaspora, our family matches, you know, where they live now, and where, you know, generations of our families have started are all over the nation now. You know, Texas, as I started saying, Detroit, you know, Ohio. And they were I think we've been going back and forth to Ohio as long as we've had family reunions. And so that connection tells us a lot about what happened even back then, how they moved the 30th parallel up north, and the British succeeded and gave the land in the South to the United States, but they went up to as far as this 30th parallel, which goes through Detroit, goes through Cleveland, Ohio, and those areas. And that was really how they instituted and began knowing that, hey, the Underground Railroad, we got to get north of this 30th parallel. Otherwise, we have to fight in order to stay free, because the southern states they've already legalized the enslavement of Native people, of Africans that they're importing, but mainly our people were people of color that were indigenous to this area, to this land. You know, I don't think my mother, my grandmother, Ethel Triplett, she always says, hey, I remember watching Roots with her, and she couldn't believe it. She was like, oh, that's not affecting us. That's not our story. You know, I don't even see what all this Roots stuff is about. I remember that, being in high school and wanting to watch the whole series. And she's like, no, our people were here prior to that. We were, you know, we never came on a slave ship. Don't even go there. So I'm just saying that a lot of the resistance of the Seminole people don't have the same background as did Alex Haley portray in Roots. So that, you know, even though we've been reclassified all as African Americans now, there's a different degree. And we're still trying to get that restorative justice even then with the Seminole tribe and with others to recognize us as indigenous members.
So I wanted to ask about returning to this land. You know, you mentioned the Trail of Tears before, and how that matriarch in your family was removed from Florida. Do you know, well, one, if your family was removed from Florida, where they went to, and also when your family may have returned to this area?
Yeah, well, as recent as maybe a year or two ago, I found that they had only removed the U.S. only successfully removed less than 1,000 of the Seminole warriors who participated in the Seminole Wars. Less than 1,000 went out to Oklahoma. And apparently, they started removing them from the Panhandle first out there. And at some point, they took them by water and by ship out there. But then eventually, by the time Jackson became president, it was walking. You know, you didn't get the treatment of getting on a boat and ship and records. So those records that we do have of the maritime removal shows that there's only 800 to 900 people that were removed by that means, by the water. But then by the mid-1830s, when the Indian Removal Act is then sanctioned by Jackson as president, they take and forcefully remove the Native people from here, and it is, in consequence, the beginning of the Second Seminole War, pretty much. And our resistance is, hey, we're not going to go. And eventually, they get John Horse to capitulate with Jessup.
Okay, Can you just clarify John Horse's position in all this? Who is John Horse?
John Horse, I would say, is the noted Seminole freedom fighter who fought. He actually was born in Florida, raised in Florida, and he ended up being removed to Oklahoma in the city of Wewoka, Oklahoma. He actually is the founder of the city of Wewoka, Oklahoma. But he found out when he got there, which the Seminoles already knew, that certain Creeks were still selling slaves. They were still trying to perpetuate the slave system. And this is in the 1830s. And he was adamant that they would never go back into slavery wherever they went. So he left from Wewoka, Oklahoma, and marched into Nacimiento, Mexico. and went to Mexico City, met with the president, and he enlisted as a Mexican militia based on his connection to Florida and their Spanish connection. And he protected the borderlands for some years, and then eventually he was recruited back by the United States to go into Brackettsville, Texas, where there is now the Seminole Scouts cemetery and the town of Brackettsville. We are hoping that we're going to put a statue of John Horse up in Texas. As a matter of fact, I've been talking with one of the high chiefs there, Tommy Perriman, and when I had to mention Chief Perriman because he is specifically I'm working with him and the Perriman Foundation, which is Warren Perriman Foundation, and we have decided and been in discussions about getting a statue for John Horse, put both in Wewoka and in Brackettsville near the Seminole Cemetery. But again, his leadership is what kept the Seminole battles ongoing. He actually came back to Florida twice to convince Wildcat and a couple of other Seminole chiefs that, hey, we might make it in Oklahoma, it's land, we can do this. And they got there and they found that the other tribes that were already there were, you know, selling their blacks off as slaves, you know, and that wasn't the purpose for Oklahoma. They had been bamboozled pretty much by going out to Oklahoma, and that supposedly capitulation was supposed to guarantee them land, and before they got there, next thing they knew, there was Oklahoma Sooners all over the land, taking it, and there was no legal recourse for them at that time. So he leaves and goes to Brackettsville, Texas, and then to Nacimiento, and he finds these scouts, U.S. Seminole Scouts, end up becoming the forerunners to our Buffalo Soldiers. And that's how that whole circle of military service starts. And they are now working with the government to provide, you know, military service and dispatch for them, but as well, they are thinking that they are being given their own free land. And in essence, that doesn't happen. You know, I mean, whatever compromises, they say Congress didn't ratify it or whatever once they get out there. But the goal was just to get them off of Florida land. And in essence, there were more than 11,000 to 12,000 left behind that didn't get to go and that carried on the full battle of the Seminole Wars. I might add, we just had a 158th family reunion in West Palm Beach of the Seminole Maroon communities. Dr. Wallace Tenney and her group got together, and they have, you know, they do an annual event there that brings the whole diaspora of Seminole tribes from Oklahoma, from Texas, from Mexico, back to Florida, and we kind of, you know, reunion and get together. And hopefully we're going to have it at Prospect Bluffs by 25 or 26, 2025, 26. Prospect Bluff will be able to host this reunion, and that's our goal now, our short-term goal.
Wow, that's awesome. I wanted to ask a little bit more about going a little bit more into the military aspect of what you said. A couple of questions. First, do you know of any perhaps individuals in your family who are noted to be at Fort Mose or to be present at Fort Mose? At Prospect Bluff?
At this point in time, I have just received this list of names in which, interesting enough, I see Thomas Mitchell on there. And also, the Farmer family, before they were farmers, were Bushes, or the Bush family were native people who married the farmers here at Hyde Park. And I also see William Bush's name on this list, who was a junior, and they came out of Jackson County, Florida. So, and they ended up moving into this community, and this is where Ethel and my Uncle Joe and all of their families come from Jackson County into this community, and that was, you know, some years back. So I have been looking at the list. I do see names of family members, like for instance, my Aunt Edith's family, the Greens. There are Greens on this list at Prospect Bluff of survivors, of people who either went to Trinidad or went to Cat Island or went to the Bahamas, Andros Island from Prospect Bluff. But one other question that you did mention is that I think sometime around the 1860s, 1870s, just after the Civil War, there became a mass migration and influx of Native people back from Oklahoma to Florida. And I'm almost positive, I looked at the military records of William Bush, and it showed him in Indianola, Kansas in 1858. And from Indianola, Kansas, they were a number of removed Native tribes living in Indianola, Kansas at that time. And I think somehow there is an untold story of the Underground Railroad coming back into Florida, you know, after it had been removed. Those people that had been removed had this longing and ancestral need to find these ancestral lands, and they have been coming back ever since.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. So.
Another question. Do you know of, is there a continued military tradition in your family at all, by any means?
I believe so, and I'll let Bossie answer that, having been in the military.
I'm trying to think. I don't know. To answer your question, I don't know.
Excuse me. That's my phone. Sorry. Oh, that's yours. Okay.
Can you take this?
Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Taking a short break here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but Bossie also did some military service, and you know, just to mention, that's one of the keen things. When I was here some years back, I had asked Bossie, how does St. Mark's fit into this? How does the name St. Mark's? And he told me that he went to the Basilica of St. Mark's in Venice.
Wow.
And when he was in the military, back during the war, whatever military period, Korean War, whatever, when he was in, he went there, and I said, yeah, now, how do they name this place? How do black people even know to name this church Thessalonial, which is the first North African community that accepted Christianity in Africa? And how did they know to name this church Thessalonial? You know, and you know, I thought that was so important. And the St. Mark's aspect of it, where St. Mark's was actually he was martyred in Egypt for telling the high priest in Egypt that Jesus had come and met all of the messianic laws, and this is that time that the calendar should change. And he was actually stoned in Egypt, in Alexandria, for that. But they had the basilica, I was mentioning the basilica in Venice, was named after St. Mark. So I'm like, all my, you know, growing up and understanding, I'm like, how does all this interconnect to this small community that names these places, their churches, their, you know, that's so important to really get to see how we, you know, who had that kind of knowledge, you know. And all my uncles, older uncles who are preachers and pastors around here, they just talk about everything as being part of the universal circle and cycle. Mm-hmm. And that's where I go with that. And this whole thing with Prospect Bluff is all about the moral arc of the universe, trying to give those people, our people, my family, and these people who live here, some type of justice, some type of restorative justice, as Dr. King even placed. You know, this is why I feel my place in time now is important, to bring all of this to light for us, you know, so that we can show that this is a continuous community here. This community has been unbroken for 200 years. I'm going to even say longer than that probably, but definitely for the last 2 centuries, you know, and they built things, they built schools, they educated themselves until we finally get into the modern era of segregation and so forth, when we have to go to other schools. But that school and the education that this community provided people, my family members back then, was impeccable. I mean, to my belief, that they would even know to name this place, you know, after the Thessalonians. You know, I'm like, wow, who was that person? You don't know who founded the church, do you, Bossie?
Yes, matter of fact.
Excuse me.
That's the church. this church, Thessaloniki, was founded by my great-grandfather, Amos Hurd. Amos Hurd was not only the founder of this church, but Amos Hurd was a representative during Reconstruction. He was a collector of customs at St. Mark's. He was a postmaster. He was a county commissioner, and held several other posts during Reconstruction. Matter of fact, he was on the Constitutional Convention, and rumor has it that when the committee met to actually write the Constitution, some of the members would rather not have him on, that they absconded to Jefferson County, wrote the Constitution, and came back. So he didn't actually have any input into it, but he was serving in the Florida legislature doing Reconstruction, and he along with 3 of his daughters founded this church. And
that was, what was his name again?
Amos Hurd.
Amos Hurd.
Yeah.
Yes.
Do you know what year you founded the church here?
Well, we shouldn't ask me. 18, before pandemic, we were celebrating, I think, our 128th anniversary. So I think it's 18, I should know that. I can't recall right off from, but right after. No. Right after the Civil War, because the written history says, in the decade following the Civil War. So it's doing 18, excuse me.
Yeah. This is a new exterior. The facade around here is way newer, but the inner core of the church still stands under there, doesn't it? Pretty much the original building.
Yes.
I have a follow-up, since you talked about duplicity to keep your grandfather from having input in the Constitutional Convention that they moved the meeting. How were black people able to maintain ownership and pay the taxes on this land during Reconstruction and during this period of and the Depression, and when we had an economic blight kind of in the United States, and also racism? How were they able to maintain legal title to the land for all this time?
I would say,
Go ahead.
I would say that they were an active fishing village. Yes. And the fact that they were able to feed themselves in this community on the fishing, oysters, and sea life, which they originally had been doing and perpetuating. My cousins today, who still live here, are still fishermen and fish those waterways. As a matter of fact, I think that made them so self-subsistence that they probably were looked on, like many of the other communities like Rosewood and others during their time, as kind of an uppity black community.
This community subsisted on fishing and farming. It's grown up now, but when I grew up in this community, you could see literally half a mile, because this was all fields. So in the last 75 years, all this growth has come about. So you grew food to eat and you fish. So it was pretty much self-sustaining as a community.
Self-sustaining.
If we were able to look at tax records, because the state and the county like to collect taxes on property, what names or groups would we see as the payees of the tax certificates for this area?
Probably the same names, the farmers, the Hawkins.
Farmers, Hawkins, triplets names are still sustaining those tax records. We're still paying our tax records for the farmer family in my mother and father's name.
Fishing was a big part of it, and they were always able to sell the fish at a penny a pound, but they caught an awful lot of fish 7 miles down the road from here in the Gulf. So that was not much, but there was always income in this community. So they were able to pay taxes.
With that being said, we'd like to see the fishing area, wouldn't we?
Yes.
Yeah, I think we're going to ride down to the beach.
I'm going to take these microphones from you now. Mm-hmm. Thank you guys so much. We're going to get moving to the next part of our interview. We're going to go see the water here that we've been mentioning. So glad to be here and do this. All right, we're out for now.
Posted. Private property.
We'll fire upon thee.
Yeah, really. All right, shoulder. What's the name and where's the location? Where are we at?
All
The
right.
name is, the incorporated name now is the St. Paul Hyde Park Walking Parentheses Cemetery, because all of my life it was known as Walker. I was under the impression that Walker, one of the families of this area, had given this property, but I found out that's not true. The property was really donated by one of the what's now triplet was Donaldson, Scott Donaldson. He was, and
Any idea where the Walker reference comes from?
yeah, Walkers were prominent.
Judge Walker.
Judge Walker,
Judge Walker.
yeah, and Henry Walker was a senator.
Okay.
Right after
And they tried to take that
Yeah.
beach even.
On the way up, you probably noticed on the right-hand side there was some farmland. That was Walker Plantation. A lot of our ancestors used to farm up there, like on, not sharecroppers because they didn't live on the land, but on shares.
Okay.
So, because I remember my grandmother we'd go up there and pull the corn in the wagons. Initially, we came all the way around, but that was a road that we could come from where we were through those woods, much shorter distance.
Is the
But
Walker
probably,
name then more one of appropriation as opposed to?
I'm not sure how Walker got involved in it since it was not donated by Walker. Probably Scott Donaldson may have gotten the land from Walker.
I actually had mentioned in the story where my mother, when we moved back down, she and Daisy Walker
Yeah.
and my aunt Effie,
Same Walker, yeah.
Daisy Walker was the daughter of Judge Walker, I believe, or one
Granddaughter.
Granddaughter, right. And I had heard them having coffee in the morning and referring Aunt Effie and my mother and her, referring to each other as cousins. Literally suggesting that, I didn't know how true that was, but I think they might have even one time worked domestically for them or something like that. But I don't know how that worked. Like I say, that's some
They were very
old
prominent
county
in this area, the
incest.
Walkers were.
Yes.
Like I said, one was a senator, and they had a lot of interest.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if they were like Confederate or what, but I think so, as slaveholders.
But literally, they own all of the property. We may go back a different way. When we were at the church, that Martin Luther King Road, what was Lowberry Road, because during my childhood, he placed a fence because prior to 1950, it was like open range. 1950, it says no fence law. You can no longer let your cattle and cows roam. Well, the Walkers had literally cows, hundreds of cows, and they just roamed over. And so he put a fence all the way along the road, all the way to the beach where we were. That's where they lived down there. All of that was fenced in. He just took it upon with no reservations whatsoever as to who owned the property. Just fenced everybody in.
So there's no challenge. It was just done.
Well, one person I understand challenged him, and I know that was a little cutout. And he says, "You're not going to fence me in, and you're not going to cross my property." And so I don't know what transpired, but I just know for a fact that Uncle Jeff's property was outside the fence.
From the perspective of your families and your time in this area, could you describe this space for us and what a meaning it has for you and your family and your legacy?
Well, it had great meaning because my relatives, all of my immediate family, my mother, my father, sisters, I have mother, father, sisters, brothers out here, so it's a personal thing with me. I moved back in this area in 1987. This area was almost like it is over there. So we invested about close to $30,000 by removing large trees and just paying maintenance and just coming out here and keeping it up. It was not kept up, it had just grown up. Whenever we had a burial out here, it was like taking your life in your own hands.
So the cemetery was forested. You had to remove these trees amongst the cemetery.
Yeah, it was not all forested, but the boundary is on this side of the fence, and there were large trees, much larger than the tree there, that we had taken out. Just to get the trees alone out, it was probably about, I know at one point it was $15,000 to get out. But it had grown up, mostly that were cactuses, prickly pears we call them, which is, if you're familiar with them, when ladies came out here for a burial, to go through that, if you get a prickly pear in your toe, it's really a problem because they're barbed. You know, like a fish
Problematic,
hook.
yeah.
You get them in, you got to get a surgeon to get them out. And so that was the concern, and people would not come out here. And now people that have been here for a while, they're really surprised because it was not fenced in, there was no boundaries, you didn't know, it was just wooded. So we did that because the significance is this, it should be a place of respect, a place of honor. You know, our relatives shouldn't have to be in the woods where you know, you can't even get in there, even Mother's Day, Father's Day, whenever, you can't even pay respect to them because you can't get to her. So that was one of the things I got involved in, and along with some other people, I did most of the work. We were able to get it. We aren't finished because we ultimately want to put a wrought iron fence and a wrought iron gate and an entrance with the name of the cemetery above it. But we're doing it a step at a time because nothing, as you know, is cheap.
What about the same question for your family, the legacy and what it
Yes, well,
what is this space?
This space is sacred to me, and to my mother's buried here. Her father and mother are here, and it's been, you know, just part of our family legacy. I've always, it kind of, growing up, it's kind of always been a sad occasion whenever he came. My uncle, you know, it always is a funeral and sad occasions, but I mean, this is as sacred a ground that we can have and say that still represents our community bond and family bonds, which is going, you know, it traverses the universe, it traverses time for us. So we have to maintain and try to allow, because they have started desecrating cemeteries here, you know, that were black cemeteries in this community. Right there near the caution light, there was one. I remember that cemetery when I would go to Wakulla.
Yeah.
Richardson Cemetery?
Richardson, where you made the turn.
The Richardson.
You probably noticed it on the right-hand side.
Now it's a real estate office down there, in the middle of it, wherever.
Real estate office is in the middle.
Well, not in the middle of it. It's proximate.
If you look in the back door, there are headstones in the back.
Too close for comfort, but
yes.
They fought it, but they were not successful in preventing them from. And I think they're about to put a RV, going to pretty much surround them. You probably noticed the sign on the 98 and when you made the turn.
So there are no laws in this area that prohibit the desecration of historic.
Yes, there is.
Well, I think even the same laws that protect indigenous burial grounds should be reflective of us as a community, of Seminole community, that we should still be under those protections through the Interior Department or whomever. But as far as going through the county is concerned, you know, and like I said, Judge Walker's way is the way it used to be for a long time here.
Are there any significant representations of service in the military among your family that are here? And could you show us a couple?
I know we have a couple of headstones.
Richard Harvey's not here. Richard Harvey was the first black that was drafted in World War II. He was proud of that, but he's not buried here, although some of his children is, I believe.
Can we see part of the family? We just couple minutes and parts that you each recognize in your family.
And you notice you see the flags that were planted out here on Memorial Day, but
that's why I asked.
But they're just, I don't want to say routine, but they were not distinguished by any particular.
But they served.
But they served. Yeah, quite a few people served out here.
I'm almost sure Remus had a headstone.
Yeah, Remus
was from the
over
second.
there. That's his granddad.
Yeah.
Way over in the corner, you'll see that.
And he was in the Corps of Engineers, went to the Philippines, I understand, back during the Spanish-American War.
To World War.
James
World War
I.
doesn't have a headstone. World War I veterans.
There's a World War I veteran here without a headstone?
Yeah.
Yes. Matter of fact, I don't know exactly where he's buried. I would think with the triplets over here, but.
See, there's.
Not putting headstones and marking them. A lot of them, like over here, you see that little stake. That's how they were marked, which was great for 6 months, but a year later, people don't know who's there anymore. We tried to catalog them. We had a project where we took pictures of each headstone. If we found funeral programs, there's GPS locations, and to the best of our knowledge, but there are just so many that's not marked.
Headstones.
You know their graves. I don't know for certain where my father's is. My mother told me one place, my brother told me another place.
I don't know exactly who that is there, but this is probably, I see, one of the earlier graves out here.
Yeah.
Mrs.
This is a headstone too.
Yeah. See, that's what you couldn't contend with. How do you know who's there? You know there's a grave, and a lot of the headstones, if as such as they were done by someone who was just get cement, scratch it in.
Okay. Do you know where the oldest gravestone that's here?
That's what I was looking for. I think probably 1909 over there under that tree. I thought that was one from Amos Harwood, the founder, but
Now,
his son.
That Richardson Cemetery that you said the real estate officer, is that Richardson Cemetery older than this one?
I don't think so, but don't quote me.
Okay.
No, I would think that this one might be older as well.
Okay.
Yeah, his grandfather Remus is over here.
Yeah, Remus. Well, that's the old name. Romulus and Remus, founders of Rome. So that's
Yes.
an old name.
And all right, I have those old names. Uncle Flavius. I have Uncle Flavius who's still around. His Flavius.
Yeah, Flavius, like Flavius Marcus.
Right.
Yeah.
Who led the slave rebellion against Rome. Well, this is actually where my mother is buried, right over here. And these are the farmer families. Or is she over in this one? But
I think over here.
Okay, she's right over here, right?
I know that.
Thank you.
That's why I was trying to see if Remus. I don't think Remus has a headstone there.
Nancy Porter, more triplets.
Marine Corps.
Harper. Oh, yeah, he's a sergeant, Air Force, Navy,
Yeah.
Vietnam.
Yeah, he was also deacon at Thessaloniki. He passed about 10, 15 years ago.
2005. Sharon Levon triplet.
Hey, baby.
These are all the triplets. Sister and brother.
Andrew
Yeah,
Sickler.
he was a Marine Corps veteran. Do you see Remus? I don't know.
Well, I'm looking
not
at
sure.
Claudine, Effie, and Minnie, my moms.
Remus is over here, but I don't think it's marked.
Your mom right where you are right now?
Yeah, she's actually right here in the second one. This is her sister.
And this is Joe.
Yes.
This is Joe's son.
They're all farmers.
Oh yeah. He was also. This
These
is.
are all recent locks.
This was your uncle. Right
Uncle
there.
Ernest there, who was in the Navy, World War II.
He's your granddaddy.
All right, yeah.
Right there.
Right. We're right here on top. And he passed in when?
1950.
He died in 19. This is my grandfather. And
He fought in World War I.
yes.
Yes.
I think he was in the Corps of Engineers too and went to the Philippines.
20th engineers.
Yes, engineers, 20th engineer, thank you. And my Uncle Ernest, who fought in both theaters in World War II. He was both in the Pacific and the Atlantic. I think he was a ship's cook or something like that, he said, or he worked in the galley.
Who's this?
And they went from the European theater over to the Pacific, and he was there actually at the end of the Pacific when they signed the treaty with the Japanese to surrender.
Was he on the ship?
Yes.
Wow.
That's what I heard. He was part of the galley crew there when they
in
signed.
World War II, the blacks, the African Americans were stewards and
Right.
cooks and
Unloaded
things,
the
yeah.
ammunitions. Were
And
not
he shot.
So yeah, these are all my family members here, and my mom's and
Dory Miller.
her family.
Yeah. Yeah.
Can you
They
get a
ex-
shot of that?
It's like a, I can't
Might
really
get
read
an
it.
etching, but
Yeah, his all of these offsprings of these Gavins, they all came down to Amos Hargreaves. Yeah.
okay.
The farmers, the Hargreaves, the Hawkins, all triplets, yeah. Because he had daughters Lucy, Lucinda, Hattie, one daughter didn't have any children, and there was another daughter. It was two.
Hey,
I think
before you all leave, we should take a group picture.
five daughters
At least
and
one.
2 sons.